Hey level uppers, it's Larry, and this is part 3 of the mini-series around the history of EverQuest's very first expansion, The Ruins of Kunark. We pick up with the last known heirs of the Sathir bloodline being killed by an attack on the imperial city of Sebelis. Now that the power of the bloodline had been lost, the Ixars needed to reorganize their efforts into something that would stand the test of time, and ideally would return prosperity to the Empire. This was when the governing entity was formed, the Emerald Circle, to help rebuild the great empire of Ik. The Emerald Circle was comprised of 5 nobles who found great success with rebuilding the Ixar Empire, but once again, the Ixars found a way to divide into 5 tribal states, and unsurprisingly, led them right back into internal conflict. The Ring of Scale was playing the long game, and were busy influencing turmoil amidst the Ixars, and a perfect storm was brewing. Over the course of approximately 700 years, problems were ever present both internally and externally, and the Sebelisian Empire was eroding. The first city to fall was the richest trade city Kunark had ever seen, led by Lord Rakashir, the city of Torsus, or what would eventually become the City of Mist. More on that in a different video. As a result of the Empire's gradual corrosion, the spirit of conquest, or even revenge, had ignited the many races within Kunark and beyond. Goblin lords from Faedra invaded the continent in massive droves and took Karnar's castle. The Froglock slaves in Sebelis had revolted, taking most of the Ixar citizens by complete surprise. The Giants organized several attacks that destroyed all of the warlord outposts before focusing their efforts on the many surrounding cities. The Empire of Ik was weakened beyond anything it had experienced before. As all of this is happening, the exiled dragon, Trakenon, had been watching very closely to the Empire's deterioration, and decided it was time to rally his allies and strike. The dragons proceeded with their aggressive attack, and effectively reduced the Empire's cities to ashes, with the final blow coming from the Poison Dragon himself, who decimated the former glorious imperial city of Sebelis and took it for his own. The Sebelisian Empire had been destroyed. Once again, the Ixars found themselves scattering to recover, and their empire would never look the same again. But not all hope was lost. The Crusaders, an army of Ixar Shadow Knights with some mystics and legionnaires, were led by a very powerful Shadow Knight named Rock Nylok. Rock Nylok looked to purify the lands of Kunark that had been taken from them. Throughout their crusades, none would be taken prisoners or slaves. The vision was that the empire would be built solely by the Ixars. The first priority of the Crusaders was to reclaim Karnar's castle, which was occupied by a goblin clan. The goblins tried to defend it for 20 days, but it was all for naught. They were overtaken and massacred. The next objective was the city of Cabalus, but something very bizarre would happen, and no detailed records exist of what really did happen. All that is known is that Rock Nylok made a pact with something very evil and would suffer from it greatly. During the Battle of Cabalus, a strange rain fell, which shrunk the Crusaders of Rock Nylok to the size of dolls, and their heads were set aflame. Rock Nylok's head burned red, and the goblins squashed the would-be emperor and his entire army. The Ixars would nearly fade into obscurity and would simply just try to survive for the next 500 years in small segmented tribes. Meanwhile, the intelligent abomination species previously created by Atrib, the Sarnak, had taken advantage of the Ixars' decline and established themselves in the massive military fortress of Chardok. They had also been delving quite deeply into dark knowledge, breeding froglocks and goblins to do their bidding. There was a particular Sarnak cult, led by a powerful priest named Zalgaz, who discovered that critical pieces of dark knowledge were within the tombs of Terrassus. The Sarnak cult investigated and learned of a ritual that involved the bones of Veneral Sathir's son, Ryle. Almost immediately upon starting the ritual, the priest in command has regret. It is at this point that evil in its purest form had been unleashed, with a bit of irony. After 1600 years of torment, and his soul being trapped in an amulet, Veneral Sathir had now materialized into the spectral body of his backstabbing son, Ryle. He wipes out all the Sarnax responsible for this ritual with the exception of the one, Zalgaz, who he converts into a vampire to do his bidding. For the next 100 years, Vinril traveled across Kunark in relative secrecy, collecting whatever sources of power he could find. He also managed to coerce the goblins and giants to follow his lead, with the promise that he would grant immortality and untold power. Once he had acquired enough power, he had occupied and rebuilt Karnar's castle, which would serve as his fortress and the focal point of his dark and evil magic. With it, he created a powerful legion of lycanthropes called Drolvargs, as well as an army of undead minions. Vinril also took it upon himself to resurrect his wife Drusilla, a loyal companion to help see his new undead empire through to completion. Over about 200 years, there had been an attempt by the High Elves to establish an outpost on the continent of Kunark, but the first attempt had been completely foiled by the Froglocks. The Dark Elves had found temporary success in establishing one on the other side of the continent, only for it to be taken by Vinril Sathir. The next High Elf attempt, led by the Paladin and Chosen of Tunair, Firiona V, would be a success, and the outpost of Firiona V was established. There was celebration, but it would be short-lived, as the High Elf Paladin would be kidnapped by Vinril Sathir's puppet, Danik Dorantath. The High Elves then declared war on the Ixar Empire. Meanwhile, the Ixars had found another opportunity to unite. This time they were led by a powerful warrior named Vecin, who wanted to see the Ixars return to glory, in not the same way that the Sathir bloodline had failed them in the past. Vecin took over the captured city of Cabalus, which would also be known as New Cebalus, the capital of the Cabalisian Empire. Vecin regarded the resurrection of Vinril Sathir a direct threat to the rise of the new empire, and he aimed to do whatever it took to stop it. And this is where the timeline begins to the expansion that we all know and love, the Ruins of Kunark. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the history lesson on Kunark, and we'll see you soon. Level up hype!